Take care when working on pre-charged air guns. High pressure air can be very dangerous. Make sure the cylinder is completely empty before you attempt to work on it. Warning: there is a legal limit of 12 foot-pounds for air rifles in the UK. It is illegal to tune or set an air rifle over this limit. The limit for air pistols is 6 foot-pounds. Watch through the video first before you attempt to dismantle the gun. If you feel it is too hard for you, then let a competent gunsmith do it for you. No responsibility can be taken by the author, video maker for any work carried out. Needless to say that any work carried out by individuals will void any current guarantee.
Right, here we have the Crosman 2260 rabbit stopper. We're going to give it a service and overhaul and maybe set the power up a little bit closer to the 12 foot-pound because these are normally about 9 or 10. These are a gas powered rifle and the gas goes in this compartment here. The barrel length is 23 inches long, which is where it gets a lot of its power from. The tools you'll need to dismantle this gun or service it is a couple of pair of pliers along with the collets to dismantle the reservoir, an Imperial Allen key set .050 and 5/64, an 11mm spanner, a Phillips screwdriver and a plain screwdriver. We'll start by removing the front cap to make sure there's no gas left in the gun. We'll start by removing the safety catch, which is just a matter of pulling the hairspring forwards like that and then pushing the safety catch out. Then let it go. Then all you have to do is to remove the stock screw. You can then remove the stock from the mechanism. Place it to one side in a safe place. Now get our 11mm spanner and unscrew the nut. Undo the rear screw with a screwdriver. Can then take the trigger mechanism away, place to one side, and the screw. Take the tension of the spring, then remove the top screw that holds the back sight on. Place that to one side, still keeping the pressure on the back. Gradually ease the back off. There you've got your hammer spring and the rear cap. Now to remove the top, get your 50 thou Allen key and remove the screw from under the bolt. Make sure you don't round this off. Don't lose the transfer port or the rubber seal inside. Here is the rubber seal. Note that the transfer port has got a larger side there and a small side. The small side goes in the top into the O-ring. You then get your 5/64 and slacken off the top grub screw. This will allow the barrel to be pulled out like that, placed to one side. You can then undo the underside if you want to remove it. Now to remove the hammer, you just pull this pin out when it moves to the back. That allows the pin to be pulled out in this groove, like that. The hammer will just fall out, placed to one side. Now the only thing that's holding the CO2 exhaust valve housing in is this slotted screw. Just remove that. Like that. And the CO2 housing and exhaust valve comes out in one piece like that. You can see the seal that seals the CO2 cartridge when you've tightened the front up. Now to change the exhaust valve, this is where you need your two collets. We'll place one on the back and one on the front. If they're a bit tight, you can always wedge them open with a screwdriver. When you've wedged it open with a screwdriver, you find it will slide on easier. Just pull it off. Same goes for the back, push it on hard. Get a good grip. You can use a vice to grip these, but for DIY a lot of people can use mole grips. Do not over tighten, but just grip it firmly without overdoing it. Grip it either side of the slot in the collet so it can crush down on it.
Lock them up.
When you've locked them up, you can unscrew it. Sometimes these are tight because there's a thread locking compound on them. Once you've got it going, you can unscrew it. Remove the mole grip. I'll remove that one because it's gone easy now. Here you can see the exhaust valve spring and the exhaust valve seal. This part of the exhaust valve is what pierces your CO2 cartridge when you first fire the gun. That will come through and puncture the CO2 cylinder like that. Right, to remove this, place our wedge in there again. Now the seals that can go on this is obviously the front one for the CO2 cartridge this O-ring, the exhaust valve seal there, and again this transfer port seal will only leak when the gun is fired if it's faulty. If the air is leaking out into the barrel with a new cartridge, it's generally this seal has gone, or the face of the valve seat in there has been damaged or has got dirt on it. That has to be perfectly clean. Remove the collet. This bolt O-ring, when it leaks, will blow back when the gun is fired. Some of these work loose and this can actually pull out. If your one is loose and pulls out, you can put some bearing fit thread locking compound on it to hold it in position. If you want to increase the power a little bit, you can place a slightly stronger hammer spring in it, along with maybe a spring guide that will help make it smoother to cock by keeping the spring in alignment when you pull the bolt back. But as you can see, the transfer port is already quite a large hole, and also the transfer port on the barrel is already quite large, so enlarging it anymore probably won't make no difference. One area you can increase the trigger mechanism is to polish this sear face to make the trigger smoother, but this is only for advanced tuners. The advanced tuners who want to tune the sear, or maybe just check their trigger unit out, you undo this screw and this screw here. This will expose the trigger sear surfaces so you can polish them up to improve the trigger pull. This is not recommended for amateurs because of the safety aspect. As you can appreciate, it can be quite dangerous if the gun can go off on its own. Pull this off carefully. Here you can see that this sear will just pull out by moving this pin out. Quite a simple trigger mechanism. Can lubricate these parts with MS2 to make it nice and smooth after you've took any sharp edges off it. Put the pin back. Make sure this locates its correct position when you put it back, with that spring inside there like that. Just replace the two screws back again. When you've tightened the two screws, just check the trigger operation to see that it works correctly. You should have a slight bit of tension on the top sear still, like that.
Take 10 thou off the OD. This should increase the power a little bit and get it a bit closer to the 12. The aim is to try and get it to around about 11. By turning that down, it will allow a bit more gas to flow around the circumference. This would obviously use a little bit more gas though. The other thing you can try, if the power is still too low, is to use a slightly stronger hammer spring. Like this. This is the standard one, and this is one a little bit stronger. But we can also put a spring guide in there which will make it easier to cock. The spring guide will go inside the hammer and give it a little bit more momentum. Because this gun is not capable of doing a lot more than 12 anyway, it's not worth making it over 12 to put on ticket. So make sure it is below 12. We're now going to turn down the OD of the exhaust valve on the rabbit stopper. Measure it to start with. It's 0.428. We'll place it in the chuck. Make sure you use a chuck that's quite true. This chuck is accurate to within a thou. Just see what the diameter is on there. Then I'm going to put 10 thou on it. Let's see how much we've took off. We've took 8 thou off. Just put another 5 thou on it. You mustn't overdo this, otherwise your seal will fall out. You can see we've still got a fair bit of meat on the edge to hold the seal in place. To make a spring guide, just get a piece of brass that fits inside, or you could turn it down just to fit. Place that in the chuck. Place the brass in the chuck. We only want it about 7/8 of an inch long at the most. We'll set the length that we want. That's about right. The diameter we want for the stronger spring at first is about 0.18 to avoid any deflection. We've got 183, which should be about right. want to just radius the end so that the spring can slide over it smoothly and make it smoother to cock. That fits okay. We've removed the guards so you can see what's going on. And now just part that off. Take the sharp edges off. We'll just remove the pip. Here you can see the spring guide we've made. That goes in the hammer, like that. You can still use the original spring, it'll still fit over it. Like that. Now place the valve inside. You can see probably that it's got a bit more clearance around the outside.
If the gun has been leaking, just change your exhaust valve and change this seal if the CO2 has been leaking off. Then replace the rear housing like this. Again, you get your two collets because this has to be done up fairly tight. Right, place the rear collet on the back. Then we'll open up the front one a little bit. Place the front one on. When you've got it in position, just clear of the thread. Just clear. Pull it out. Grip with the mole grips again. Then the front one. And just give it a little nip up without letting it slip. That's it. We'll now remove the collets. And assemble the gun. You can check for operation, it pushes in and out, and that the spring returns it back to its face. So you can see the puncture point coming through when the gun would be fired. Cylinder upside down, and with the CO2 forward, with the CO2 seal forwards, and our locking screw position now. Push it in carefully, trying to keep it dead true so it lines up with the hole. When it's lined up, the transfer port top will be lined up as well. We'll then put our small screw back in to lock it there. start it off with your fingers and just give it a little nip up. Now place the barrel through there with the transfer port being down. When you replace this A bracket, make sure this side faces the back, because this is where the barrel separator goes, like that. Place it on the barrel. If you wish to remove the front sight to put a silencer on, you could just heat this up gently with a bit of heat and then pull it off. But we're not putting a silencer on this one, so we'll leave it on. But if you was going to put a telescopic sight on it even, you could take this off. Right. The transfer port facing to the top, place it together like that. The barrel spacer in. Pull this forward clear. Now replace the hammer in with the hole at the top. Just push it in clear to line it up with that larger hole in the slot. We'll now replace the pin with the circumference there. Place the pin in. Move it forward, and that stops the pin from pulling out. We'll now get our seal for the transfer port. Place it in the hole. Place the smaller portion of the transfer port in now. Press it in. Make sure this is forward like that, and the bolt is forward, so that it locks the pin behind the brass bolt. I'm going to remove that screw. That'll make it clearer. We then lower the top housing . It's all a bit fiddly. Get the barrel fully back in the housing. The barrel will not twist like that when the transfer port is locked in position. Then replace the small 50 thou screw while holding the barrel still in position. Just check that it lines up. Just nip it up gently for now. Check that the hammer is pulled back when you pull the bolt back, as you can see here. Can then line up the front. We'll now pull the A-frame back. Line it up by looking along it. Make sure it's true. With your 5/64, just nip it up. Again, ensuring it's still lined up. Just nip up the top one, like that. We can now replace the hammer spring and the rear cap. Make sure one screw's facing down and one up. Place that in like that. Look down to see it lines up, and then you can replace the back sight and screw. Hold the back end in flush. This will line the hole up. Just before it comes tight, centre the back sight where it was before. And just hold it there and nip it up. Now we've got to do is replace the trigger unit. Like that. We have the rear screw. Here we got the rear screw, start that off. Do not over tighten. Make sure it's all working okay. Hold the front down and replace the front nut. Just gently nip it up because it's only a small thread. Still keep checking it's working okay. Then tighten the back one up a little bit more. Just nip that up. Check that it cocks. And we'll uncock it, put in the trigger. It works okay. Any seals that need replacing, you just pick them off with a pick and replace it with a new one. We're now ready to replace it back in the stock. Lower the stock onto it, like that. Place the screw. Just snip the stock screw up. Then all you have to do is pull that spring forward again. Pulling it forward from here like that. Pull it forward and let the safety catch go in. Check that it still works. That's it. Then place your new cartridge in the front. Get a new cartridge. Place it in the front like this. Tighten the front cap tight as you can. That's it. That's it. Now when you fire it, always tighten that as tight as you can, which will give you better gas flow. Then all you have to do is cock it, point it in a safe direction at all times. Check it, safety catch works. In a safe direction, take the safety off. Cock it again. See, the second bang was a lot louder because the cartridge has been pierced. Now check it on a chronograph to make sure it doesn't exceed 12 foot-pounds with any pellet that you might be able to obtain. These are normally okay for that. These generally do not go over 12 foot-pounds, but check it anyway.
Today we're going to do the update on the Ratcatcher itself, which is basically the same as a rabbit stopper, but we'll just take this one apart so you can see the differences between this and the rabbit stopper. Obviously the pistol, the 2240, is the same as this except for that and the barrel there, but the rest of it is much the same. This is slightly shorter on the pistol, and the pistol obviously hasn't got this front plastic piece here. Right, you need a couple of Allen keys, a 50 thou one, and even a 2mm one will just about fit that. That fits that quite well. But if you've got an Imperial set, that would be even better. Right, we'll get the gun off of there and we'll start to take it apart. You can start by taking the stock off. It's just 2 screws, one each side. With the gun you get this trigger lock, which you can use to remove this trigger block that's on the gun. Got your instruction book in there as well. Put that in there, 3 little prongs, and then it will pull apart like that. And there it is. Make sure there's no gas in there. Fire it. No gas. Release the front and empty the CO2 powerlet out. So there's not one in this one. To remove this top half, you've got a screw there and a screw under there, a 50 thou Allen key, and the forward one, which is 2mm or just 5/64 in Imperial. So we'll back that one off, undo the screw there and there, and we can remove this plastic part there. That one. Make sure the screws are still in there and put that to one side. When this scrub screw is undone, you can just slide that forward. The front sight is held on just by friction, and you can normally just push it off. If they're a bit tight, you can warm it up over a hot gas stove or put some hot water on it. That's that. Now that will slide off. Goes on like that. Same as on a rabbit stopper. I'll start again. The only thing holding the barrel in now is the transfer port, the same as on a rabbit stopper. You can, with this cock back, get a 50 thou Allen key and place it in the small Allen screw in there. Make sure you don't round this off. There. There. Just unscrew that. It's a very small screw, like that. There's that in there. Then you unscrew the back screw there that goes through the back sight. When that's undone, the back sight and the screw will come off. And then you can just raise this up like that. That will leave the transfer port on the top and the hammer back here in the cocked position. So you can hold this pin, safety catch off, and then release it slowly. This transfer port just pulls out of a rubber seal with the shortened half on the underside that goes in the rubber seal. To remove this back piece here with the hammer spring in, you've got to undo this screw there. Just hold the spring pressure in with your thumb, and then that will undo like that. That is the rear screw. I'm going to keep that in that tray, and then this will just release like that. Here is the hammer spring. The hammer comes out by moving it back to there and pull that pin out. Remember that it's the short end that goes in now into the larger hole at the top there. Now pull the hammer out like that. And now we're going to take this front screw out of here and remove the trigger. When you take this trigger unit off, be careful because there's a very small ball and spring in there that goes into this detent that's on that safety catch. Hold this little space in plate and use a smaller screwdriver. Right, and place that to one side. Now you've got to watch you don't lose the little ball and spring by keeping it up like that. If I turn it round like this, you'll see the spring on the top there. There is the spring, and there is a very small ball in there, which is there. Place them to one side. But you can see now there's no transfer port in there. You can just pull that apart. This is all made of plastic and this is brass. This brass piece is just pressed in there, the same as on the other crosman rat catchers and pistols and the rabbit stopper. If you're not careful, that can just pull out of there because it's only just banged in there. That can be pulled out like that and that can come out. and that's the unit there like that. I'll place that to one side, and now we'll take the valve unit out of the Ratcatcher, which is, it's only this small screw here that holds it in place. So we undo that like that. The valve unit in these is exactly the same as in the rabbit stopper and the 2240 pistol. There's the little screw. Now that's removed, there's not much holding the valve unit in there now, and it might just fall out like that. And there it is. There is the seal that the valve will come through and pierce the capsule, and that seal will prevent the gas from leaking that in the outside, so it can only go into this reservoir. This is exactly the same as a rabbit stopper and the pistol. Some customers have been taking this part off, as it shows you in the rabbit stopper part, and drilling it in that way 6mm deep and with a 6mm drill. It must be 6mm so it leaves a ledge for that return spring there to rest against inside, but that will give you a slightly bit more volume of gas when that is fired and releases it. Well, I'm going to show you how to take the trigger unit apart on this. These are very simple. You've got this screw there and that one there. All you have to do is unscrew them to gain access to the sears and the trigger. So remove that one, like that, and then that one. You only need to take this apart if you intend to tune up the trigger by stoning it or making it slightly smoother. This is only recommended for more advanced air gunners that have got a bit more experience in that field, because obviously the trigger unit, if you're not careful, can make the gun dangerous because it could go off on its own. If you just lift this off carefully, I'll try and do that so it keeps it all in position. There you can see, there's the safety catch, and this is the sear that drops down. That sear will drop down and allow the hammer to hit the back of the valve. But as you can see, these are normally just stamped out of thin plate. And what you can do, you can get an oil stone and stone the surfaces, take any burrs off, and even smooth off the back. This has to be done very carefully so you don't get the hammer going off on its own. You could even put a forward slope downwards like that, at that angle, so that you get a crisper drop off when the hammer flies forward. So as you can see, when that trigger is pulled, all it does is come up like that. Just remove the spring for a minute to show you, and that will let the hammer is engaged in that like that, and then when you pull the trigger, that comes down, the spring will allow that to hit the back of the valve, which is that, knocking it open and allowing the gas to come out of there and into the transfer port and the barrel and fire the pellet out. So all you do is stone any edges, sharp edges on there, smooth it all off, and along the top there where the stamper has gone, the die. Obviously you're going to do that much more thoroughly than that to get it all nice and shiny and smooth. And then you can do the same to the trigger. This one is not too bad. You can smooth all them surfaces round them all off nicely, and then you can lubricate it with like a MS2 molybdenum grease when you put it all back. Stone it like that. You can use wet and dry, like 800 wet and dry, and then go to 1200 just to smooth all these edges off, make them nice and smooth. That way you could do it like that, and then just put it back together. There is a little spring washer here that holds the trigger to one side like that. You put the spring on there like that. And then you can replace this part on the side. Just locate the pins, push it together, place the safety catch in with the slot facing down and the red colour on the left, and put the trigger in. Like that. Bit fiddly. And put the pin in the spring washer. Like that. Then place the side plate on the pins, and then put the two screws back in. Just start that one off first. Don't forget, if you're going to use MS2, you would put that on there, and that would also help to hold it together. Just do that up a little bit, and the other screw in now. Make sure it's straight, just nip it up. When you've done this up, don't overdo it. Just check that it works by sliding that backwards and forwards, and that the trigger can't be pulled with the safety catch out that side, but when it comes through into the gap, there you can see it working. You can fit a trigger shoe. This is the trigger shoe we do, which makes the trigger pull feel a lot lighter, because it spreads the load over 3 times the thickness, because the trigger on these is very thin and this is much thicker, and it's made to fit on there exactly. We'll do that in a moment when we get the gun back together. So you can modify the valve unit as shown as per the rabbit stopper, and you can also drill the 6mm deep hole by a 6mm drill. Now we'll put that back in the reservoir unit. It has to go in with the transfer port on the upper side, which is that way, and that at the front. So that goes in like that. Push that along just till the transfer port lines up at the top. You can use a little Allen key to line it up like that. Then when you turn it over, that threaded part should show, so you can put the very small screw back in that locks it in position, like that. Then just nip that up, don't overdo it, because you've only got a few threads in there. And going into brass, you could easily strip it if you don't overdo it. Alright, so that's the reservoir put back in. The seal that's in there is the same as in a rabbit stopper and in the pistol. you can just pick them out like this. These are not an O-ring, but like a squarish O-ring. Don't know if you can see that, but it is not round as such. It's round on the OD and ID, but the section is actually square. It's just a little bit thick that way. And you can put that back. So now we'll put the trigger unit back on. Don't forget, when you do that, the easiest way is to drop the little ball in first in the hole for the safety catch, like that, and then place the spring on top. And then when you lower this down, make sure it don't bend up that spring and just pushes it straight down. So we'll do that with just that front screw just to hold it together for now. Lowering it carefully so the spring goes down and not bending over, like that. Then look underneath to line it up. Then the forward screw with a plate goes in there. If you're not going to put the plastic bit back, you can shorten this screw, take the thickness of that plate off that screw and then put it back in if you don't like the plastic, which I've personally done. But we'll put this back together as it was, put the screw in there and then put it back in there. Just start it off. Hole. Make sure they're lined up. And then just nip it up, that'll hold it together. Check that the safety catch works, which it does nicely. Should just click into position. You can then replace the hammer, put it in so far again till that hole lines up with the hole at the back, and then you put the short stubby part of the pin in there, like that. If I pull the trigger with the safety off, that will allow the hammer to go forward. The spring guide, if you're putting the tuning kit in, the spring guide would go in the front there. And that will go back. Now while we've got it apart, instead of putting it back with this plastic stuff and this brass bolt, we're going to put our rear dovetail block on it, which is made of aluminium, and will eliminate the scope movement you get if you use these little pro blocks, because these pro blocks are not the most solid of pieces to put on there, because when you're putting them on, you tighten that up over the barrel with that screw and that clamps it on the barrel, but it does tend to pull this plastic piece up. As that clamps down, it's pulling that part and the barrel up, and we've actually had these breaking, snapping across there and leaving this piece at the back left on there, and it's all snapped off. Because what it is, when you do that clamp up, and then when you put the dovetail on there, not so much with a little Mickey Mouse scope like that, if you put decent mounts on there, they've got tremendous force there and they will be fighting that screw there. And neither of them will win in the end. You might even strip the thread. So we prefer to use this where you can clamp the scope on there and it's much more secure. Our one has got a grub screw on the top to fix the barrel in position. So what you do is make sure this is undone a little bit. You actually get the Allen key in the kit, and you also get a spare transfer port. So you undo this a little bit, push the barrel in, look at the underneath, make sure that the transfer port is lined up dead centre of that circle. And when it's dead centre, while you're looking at it, gradually tighten up the little grub screw. This makes it a little bit easier to put together as well, but it also prevents the gas from leaking out around the outside, under here and around the top like it could do. And you can, what we prefer to do, is when you've put that transfer port back in there like that, if you get a small bit of silicone and wipe it round, only a small piece, put a little bit of silicone round now, leave it for 10 or 15 minutes till it goes nearly rubbery, and then just clamp it together, and that will prevent it leaking at all. And that will also increase the power a little bit along with this bolt housing, because as you can see, as is designed there to push the pellet forward and get a better gas flow, which when we tested it against these rat catchers, it gained 30 to 40 feet per second. So when you've got that fixed on there and that there, we'll put the rear spring retainer in like that. Make sure that the holes are lined up backwards and forwards. And then replace that screw that came out the back. Just nip it up. When it starts to get a bit tighter, you can use the right size screwdriver. Just nip it up, don't overdo it again. And then just check that it works, which it does. So now we'll put the transfer port back in, like that. If you're going to do your silicone, now's the time to do it. And then gradually lower the top onto it like that. Move the bolt forward so it can lower down. To look at the underside so it lines up in the hole like that. And now you can put the screw in the back. We're not going to use the rear sight. We do these with a cutaway so that you can still use the open sights if you want. But most people use a telescopic sight. So we'll put this back without that. Put that in there, line it up, and then just nip it up. I'm going to use a slightly smaller one. Keep it in the middle. That's it. I'm not going to do it up too tight yet, just going to do it up nearly there. So I've still got a bit of movement, because you now need to hold the front down. Leave it slightly loose, Now hold the front down and cock it like that, and you can then put the very small 50 thou Allen screw back in like that. Make sure you don't cross thread it, and just nip that up like that. Again, don't over tighten it, because you'll probably have a hell of a job to get it out again. We just nip them up. And now you can put this back on if you're going to do that. But we're going to put our A-frame on, which we do. This is the wide one. You can put this on if you want, but there will be no holder at the front for the plastic grip. But you can just use the one screw through there to leave it held on if you want. And then when you put this on, pull it back tight, which will apply friction like that. Then you can put that screw in if you want to keep this on there. Just nip it up. Line it up, the screw on the top. Just nip that up. Don't overdo this either, because there's only a couple of threads in there. That's secure enough as it is, like that really, without that screw. Undo this carefully like that. This is the wide one that we do, which has got a dovetail at the bottom and on the top. And that will just slide on that way round with the gap there. That's in case you're going to use one of them plastic strips to fill that gap in. But again, I don't like plastic, so I won't be using that. And that will just slide on like that, and then onto this piece here, like that. Put it back tight like that, and then you just nip up the top screw and the bottom screw, making sure that the barrel is dead centre along the top. So look along it, line it up, make sure in its centre, and then tighten them up. If you don't do that, you'll never be able to zero your scope. Only nip them up slightly. Like that. And then just check that it works. Safety catch is off. And there it is with that on. Cock it like that. You can uncock it by holding the trigger and holding the bolt back and slowly releasing it. Check the operation of the safety catch, that it won't work, and you cock it. So it won't fire. Take the safety catch off. Shouldn't fire on with nothing in if you can help it, but it won't hurt this one. And that's that. You then refit the stock with just 2 screws. Put that in like that. It has to lock onto them 2 little screws at the front like that. And there's that done. Get the 2 screws that go in there. Whatever you do, don't use one of these as a pistol because they're generally over 6 foot-pounds. And if it is a pistol over 6 foot-pounds, it becomes a Section 5, a prohibited weapon, which is a lot worse than having a Section 1 firearm. The Section 5 is the same as a machine gun, or with this new law, brocock. So that's that. Now I'll show you what the trigger shoe looks like. Fit the trigger shoe like this. These have got their own Allen key for it, because these are 1.5mm, these Allen keys. And you put it on there, you'll notice that the bottom is flared out to allow for the wider part of the trigger there. So it's flared out there and it's tapered back like that and topped off so that it will fit the trigger exactly like that. Then just hold it in position and just nip up the 2 little locking grub screws on that side. Only slightly. There's 2 of them there. Just nip that up a little bit like that. And now is the gun with the trigger shoe on. And now I'm going to fire it again. You can feel the trigger. The trigger pull now is much better, especially if you've smoothed the rough edges out on that sear and the top of the trigger. Now you just put the gas in with the small end, neck end in there first, and then you would just tighten that up like that. The first shot will pierce the gas cylinder, and then the second shot will be at full power, and you should get about 20 shots or even more. You can fit a longer barrel if you want more power as well, but don't exceed 12 foot-pounds, which I don't think they would easily do anyway. So now we're going to check it on a chronograph and make sure it's not over 12, which it very unlikely will be. This is a close-up of the trigger shoe and the bolt housing. If you get a chance, come and see us at the shop in South Benfleet, 316 High Road. We've got a vast range of air guns, new and used, and also the full range of Simmons scopes, Optimates, Opti2s and Tasco scopes.